The last thing I expected on the worst night of my career was to fall in love with the man who set my broken coffee machine back to life with a paper clip and a look of quiet. Devastating competence. My name is Reed Callahan. I'm 34 years old. A history teacher at Denfeld High School on the west side of Duluth, Minnesota. And I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I am not a person who falls quickly. I've been described, gently by well-meaning friends, as emotionally disciplined. My ex said I processed grief like a city budget meeting. So understand that what happened during those 31 hours inside the school means something. It means everything. It started the way all disasters start in Duluth, with the weather forecast being wrong. The National Weather Service had predicted 6 to 8 inches overnight. What actually came down off Lake Superior was 23 inches in 11 hours, with wind gusts that turned the school parking lot into a wall of white noise. By 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in February, the roads were closed, the buses weren't running, and my principal, Dr. Amara Yusuf, had made the call. 42 students, 9 staff members, and one man named Miles Okafor who had come to give a CPR certification class. We were all staying put. I did not know Miles yet. I knew only that there was a stranger in the nurse's office with the calmest eyes I had ever seen. Already on the phone with the hospital coordinating his absence. Already pulling supply lists out of a black bag like he had done this before. Like being stranded in a blizzard was just another Tuesday in triage. Wait, because what he said next to Dr. Yusuf stopped me cold in the hallway. You've got 42 kids and 9 adults. You'll need to consolidate rooms by body heat, not by grade. Put the youngest on the interior walls furthest from the windows. And whoever's in charge of the cafeteria stock, they should start now, not in an hour. He said it the way you'd say pass the salt. Calm. Empirical. Like the building had already told him its secrets and he had simply listened. Dr. Yusuf blinked at him. Then she looked at me, standing there in the hallway with my coat half on, and said, "Reed, you're with Mr. Okafor." That was how it began. His name, I learned in the first 15 minutes, was Miles Okafor, 31. ER nurse at St. Luke's for 4 years, originally from Columbus, Ohio, now planted firmly in Duluth because, and I quote, "the cold keeps you honest." He said it without irony, zipping open his bag to reveal what I can only describe as a preparedness kit that would embarrass a FEMA coordinator. Trauma shears, a pen light, 2 emergency blankets, a small suture kit, hand warmers, a bag of trail mix, and a paperback copy of The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, its spine cracked in 4 places from rereads. I noticed the book first. That's the thing I want you to know. "You read Le Guin at work?" I asked, which was possibly the most schoolteacher sentence I have ever uttered. He looked up at me. His eyes were dark and level and faintly amused. "I read Le Guin everywhere," he said. "You have a problem with that?" I did not have a problem with that. We spent the first 2 hours doing the practical work, the work that needed doing, the work that, I'll admit, Miles had largely already mapped out while I was still processing that we were stuck. We moved the younger students to the main hallway and the library, stacked chairs against drafty door frames, inventoried the cafeteria. 2 of my sophomores, twins named Jordan and Petra, turned out to be remarkably competent at organization, and Miles recruited them instantly, giving them a checklist written in his precise, unhurried handwriting. They looked at him with the same expression I was already wearing. "Oh, you're that kind of person." But here's what I didn't expect, the part that genuinely undid me. Around 7 o'clock, after the kids had eaten and the wind had risen to a frequency that made the windows vibrate, a sophomore named Caleb started crying. Not loudly. The terrible quiet kind, hunched over his phone that had just lost signal, texting into nothing. I saw it from across the room and started toward him. But Miles was already there. He sat down next to Caleb on the library floor, not crouching, not looming, just sitting, cross-legged like they were both just 2 people on the ground. He said something I couldn't hear. Then Caleb laughed, and a surprised, reluctant laugh, and Miles handed him the trail mix. And they sat together for a while, not talking, which I have always thought is the harder and more generous thing to offer. I stood in the doorway of the library and felt something shift in my chest. Like a drawer I'd thought was empty suddenly had something in it. I turned back to the hall before he could see me watching. By 10 p.m., the building had settled into an odd, provisional peace. The younger kids were asleep on gym mats we'd dragged from the equipment room. My colleague Diane had organized a card game for the older students that was becoming genuinely competitive. The wind outside had taken on a deeper register, less howl, more pressure, and you could feel the temperature in the building drop 2 degrees in the space of an hour. Miles and I were in the history classroom. My classroom. He was sitting on a student desk, not at it, on top of it, legs hanging, looking at the map of the Great Lakes I'd pinned to the wall in September. I was at my own desk, grading papers I'd brought home and never gotten to, finding the task suddenly very important. "You've got Superior circled," he said. "I circle it every year," I said. First day of school. I asked them, "What do you actually know about the lake you live next to?" 9 out of 10 kids have never been to the North Shore, never seen it from above. They live 30 minutes from the largest freshwater lake on Earth, and it's just scenery. Miles looked at the circle. "You're trying to make them feel the scale." "I'm trying to make them feel anything," I said. History is all about making the irreversible feel real. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, that's what nursing is too. You just have less time." It was the kind of sentence that doesn't ask for a response. It just sits there, accurate and heavy, and you either meet it or you don't. I met it. We stayed quiet for a while, which felt, unexpectedly, like a form of agreement. And then the power went out. Not a flicker. A clean, complete cut. The building went dark, and the heating system wound down with a sound like a long exhale, and for 3 seconds no one moved. Then I heard Miles say, from somewhere in the dark, "Flashlights are in the nurse's office, second drawer on the left," and I thought, of course he already knew that. We regrouped. We'd planned for this technically. Miles had, technically. The emergency blankets came out. The hand warmers. We consolidated everyone into the library and gym, 2 rooms, body heat doing what the furnace no longer could. Miles moved through the dark with his pen light, making soft pools of yellow on the floor, checking on each student with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who has learned to triage not just bodies but spirits. At some point, around midnight I think, we ended up back in my classroom. The emergency generator had kicked on in the main hallway, but my room was dark except for the white glow coming through the windows, the snowlight, the impossible brightness of a Duluth blizzard at night. We had 2 of the emergency blankets. Miles handed me one and sat down against the wall beneath the Lake Superior map, knees up, blanket around his shoulders. I sat down next to him. Maybe 2 feet away. Then, because the cold was real and the room was dark and the night had already stripped away the formality of being strangers, I sat a little closer. He didn't move away. Hour 14. "What do you do?" I asked, "when someone doesn't make it?" It was a question I'd wanted to ask since the library, since Caleb, since the trail mix and the quiet sitting. Miles took a slow breath. "I do what I can do in the moment," he said. "And then I let the moment end." He paused. "That sounds cold." "It's not cold. It's the only way I've found to keep showing up." "It doesn't sound cold," I said. "It sounds like something you had to learn the hard way." A sound of confirmation, not elaboration. "Then, what about you? What do you do when a student doesn't connect?" I thought about that. "I wait," I said. "Sometimes a year. Sometimes more. And then one day they come back and tell you the thing you said in October finally made sense in March. History works on a delay." "People work on a delay?" he said. "Yeah." I looked at the window, the white light, the snow still coming. "Yeah, they do." We were quiet again. This time it lasted longer. The building creaked in the wind. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed softly in their sleep. Miles shifted slightly and our shoulders were touching. Not dramatically, not as a gesture. Just the practical physics of 2 people sharing warmth against a wall in the dark. And I thought, I am going to remember this exact moment for the rest of my life. What happened next? I still can't explain it, except to say it felt like something both of us had been deciding for hours. "You okay?" Miles said, not as a pleasantry. As a real question, the kind nurses learn to ask in a particular register, the kind that means I'm actually asking, I'll actually listen. I thought about the honest answer. "I keep being," I said. He turned his head and looked at me in the snow light. "Me too," he said. And we stayed like that. shoulders touching, blankets pooled across our laps. The map of Lake Superior above us circled in red marker, until the sky outside went from black to charcoal to the pale, exhausted blue of 5 in the morning, when the plows finally started and the roads began, inch by inch, to come back. Hour 22. The power came on at 7:14 a.m. The heat took another hour. By 8, parents were calling. The parking lot was accessible, and my classroom was flooding with the specific relief chaos of a school emerging from crisis mode. Kids who'd slept on gym mats now caffeinated on the cafeteria's emergency instant coffee supply, exchanging their Blizzard credentials like veterans. Miles was helping a junior named Thomas with what turned out to be a sprained wrist from sleeping on it wrong, a very Duluth Blizzard injury, when Dr. Yusuf came to find me. She shook my hand, which is not a thing she normally does, and said, "Good work, Reed," which meant something from her because she does not offer it casually. I found Miles in the nurse's office, repacking his black bag with the same systematic attention he'd unpacked it with. The trauma shears, the pen light, the hand warmers, the Guin paperback, which he set on top and then paused on. "You should take it," I said. He looked up. "You've read it?" "Twice in college." I was a different person then, I paused. A less winter-aware person. He laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one, the kind that shows you who a person is for a second. Then he held the book out. "Take it anyway," he said. "You can give it back." I took it. Our hands overlapped on the cover for a second, the kind of moment that, in any other context, you might not notice. In a school nurse's office after a 31-hour blizzard lockdown, I noticed everything about it. "When?" I asked, meaning when can I give it back? "I'm at the hospital Tuesday through Saturday," he said. "But I have Sunday mornings." He said it carefully, which meant he had thought about it before saying it. "There's a place on Superior Street, Canal Park Bakery. They have good coffee and bad seating and a window that looks out at the lift bridge." "That's a very specific pitch," I said. "I'm a specific person," he said, and that, right there, is when I understood that the 31 hours hadn't been the story. They'd been the reason I was ready to hear one. I went to Canal Park Bakery that Sunday. The coffee was good, not bad. The seating was terrible. Mismatched chairs, a table that wobbled, and the window did look out at the lift bridge, its steel cables ice white in the February light. Miles was already there when I arrived, which I had not expected, and he had 2 cups on the table, which I had also not expected. "You guessed my order," I said. "Black, no sugar," he said. "I guessed based on the fact that you grade papers with the focus of someone who doesn't need additional variables." I sat down. The lift bridge was still. The lake beyond it was frozen in plates, gray-white, vast and silent. I put the Le Guin book on the table between us, and he put his hand on it but didn't pick it up. And we sat there for a moment in the specific warmth of a Duluth coffee shop in winter, which is a warmth earned, a warmth that means something because of everything outside. "I have a question," I said. "Okay." "The paperclip," I said. "For the coffee machine." "In the nurse's office." "How did you know that would work?" He blinked. Then he smiled, slowly, the way some smiles happen, not performed, just arrived. "It's a bunomatic," he said. "The reset switch is behind the water intake. Happens all the time in hospitals." "Of course it does," I said. "You're impressed," he said. "I'm impressed," I confirmed. He picked up his coffee. "So are we going to talk about the book," he said, "or are we going to talk about the blizzard?" "The book is about the blizzard," I said. Le Guin understood that the cold is just the context. The real story is who you become in it. Miles looked at me over the rim of his cup. "You were a literature teacher in a previous life," he said. "History," I said. "Same thing, longer timeline," he laughed again. And outside, the lift bridge began to rise, the low mechanical groan of it. The cables tightening, the whole steel architecture lifting to let a freighter through the channel even in February, even in the cold because the work doesn't stop, because Duluth doesn't stop. And we both turned to watch it.
Shoulder to shoulder without thinking about it.
The same way we'd sat against the wall at midnight with the snow coming down. He reached across the table and turned the book over, face down, like we'd be back to it later. Like there was a later. Like this was the first page of something, not the last. I thought about what I'd said to my students about Lake Superior. about living next to something enormous and not really seeing it, about how history makes the irreversible feel real. Some things, I thought, don't work on a delay. Some things arrive right on time. 3 months later, the school security camera footage from the blizzard night, the hallway cam that I'd completely forgotten about, got flagged by our IT coordinator for a routine archive review. She pulled it up by accident in front of me and stopped. On the screen, the dark hallway, the snow glow through the windows, and 2 figures sitting against the wall outside my classroom door. One with a blanket pulled up, one leaning slightly, both still, the way people are still when they're not performing stillness, when they're just in it. Together, in the cold, in the long middle of the night, my IT coordinator looked at me. I looked at the screen. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "He's coming to dinner on Friday," I said. She smiled and closed the window, and I walked back down the hall toward my classroom, toward the Lake Superior map still pinned to the wall with the red circle still on it. And I thought, the irreversible has already happened. You're just catching up, and I was okay with that. I kept being